The Civil War had a profound impact on American history and was a turning point for civil liberties, states' rights, and loyalty to the nation.
The main event of the war was not just slavery, but did have a big part of it. Economics had a big role in it because slaves were a big part for manufacturing in the South. The other main causes were the Underground Railroad and the Missouri Compromise because it angered the Southern people a lot and led to the Bleeding Kansas of 1854. Kansas had a vote whether they wanted to become a slave state or a free state. This vote was very important because this was a vote where chaos broke out. This also overturned the Missouri Compromise that was created in 1820. And finally, Abraham Lincoln, during his presidency, he made great speeches, such as the Gettysburg Address, and led the nation.
The Union had many great leaders such as Ulysses S. Grant, William Sherman, Philip Sheridan, and George Thomas. The most famous of them all was Abraham Lincoln, as he played an important role in the war by abolishing slavery. The Union also had a larger population of 22 million people, whereas the Confederates only had 9 million. With the slaves being free, the Union Army grew by 200,000 men, so they had strength in numbers. The Union could make their own supplies and replenish them when needed, unlike the Confederacy. However, the Union also had many disadvantages. They didn't know the land like the Confederates, so they had difficulty with navigation. Because the Union created plans of attack, they came off as aggressive to some people. The Confederacy had a large advantage because they were fighting on familiar territory. They also had more time to capture Union soldiers because they had a much larger coastline. It is said that the Confederates had better leaders such as Robert E. Lee and Stonewall Jackson. However, the Confederacy had trouble with foreign aid because Europe didn't recognize the Confederacy, and the Union was in a good spot to block trade. The Confederacy also lacked men, with guns outnumbering people 32-1. The Battle of Gettysburg was one of the most famous, but also one of the bloodiest. It was the inspiration for Lincoln's famous Gettysburg Address and is now a historic icon. The battle lasted for a total of 3 days and 51,000 soldiers were killed, wounded, captured, or reported missing. Robert E. Lee led the Army of North Virginia to Gettysburg after his victory at the Battle of Chancellorsville. His goal was to weaken the Northern Army and to destroy their appetite for war. Cavalry was limited to patrolling and scouting in the beginning of the war. Cavalry riders were sent on supply runs and set to guard supplies. By 1863, however, the armies began to use horses for more combative situations. The largest cavalry battle was fought on June 9, 1863 in Brandy Station, Virginia. Horse care was the most important thing, and each regiment had its own blacksmith. Northern soldiers had more horses to choose from and would simply choose another if theirs became lame or injured. Southern troops had to bring their own horse and often became foot soldiers if theirs died or became sick. Each regiment contained 100 to 110 soldiers. Each soldier could choose to fight on foot or mounted. More than 1 million horses and mules were killed throughout the Civil War. 1,500 horses alone were killed at the Battle of Gettysburg. The Underground Railroad had a huge impact on the Civil War. It wasn't an actual railroad, but it was given the name because of the secrecy and how many people were using it. Runaway slaves used darkness as a disguise to travel between states and stopped at people's houses, which were called stations. There, they were provided with food and shelter. One road went through 14 northern states and Canada because Canada was out of reach for the slave bounty hunters. Escaping the slave owner's property was the hardest part of this, so people who escaped were very lucky. Harriet Tubman was a freed slave who helped 300 people escape. Harriet Tubman was born into slavery in the eastern shore of Maryland, either in 1820 or 1821. Her first attempt to escape was with her brothers. They had second thoughts, however, and turned back. The second time she tried to escape, she went through the Underground Railroad that led to Pennsylvania. After she escaped and settled down with a good job in Philadelphia, she heard that her niece and 2 children were sold. That sparked her to start helping with the Underground Railroad. She went off to free her niece and 2 children with her brother-in-law and took them back to her house. After that, she spent over 11 years helping 70 slaves to Maryland and 50 to 60 slaves to Canada. As her reputation grew, she met other famous people and even decided to move to Auburn, New York to help near the Canadian border. Her last trip was in November 1861, and after she went to join the Union Army.
Amendments 13, 14, 15. These amendments are about slavery and freeing them, especially the 13th Amendment, that says slavery is prohibited, and stays like that to this day. The 14th Amendment says that anyone that's born in the United States or is naturalized is an American. That includes African Americans. Amendment 15 states that it's illegal for the government to prohibit a citizen from voting because of their race, color, or previous servitude. All of these amendments are to protect African Americans and other colored people.
Abraham Lincoln was the 16th President of the United States. He is most famous for his address at Gettysburg and ultimately for uniting the nation. He passed the Emancipation Proclamation, which declared all slaves as free. He was described as a kind and caring man and had compassion for all. Education was important to him, but his family was poor and illiterate. Lincoln sought to educate himself and would walk for miles to find a book to read. He was assassinated on April 15, 1865 by John Wilkes Booth. Lincoln was set to attend the play of Our American Cousin with his wife and an Army officer. The officer ended up canceling, and his wife told him not to go. Lincoln was set on going, however, and his wife suggested bringing a second bodyguard. He declined and refused to believe any notion that someone was going to assassinate him. John Wilkes Booth slipped into the box where the president was watching the play and fired a bullet at the back of his head. The bullet entered behind his left ear, mortally wounding him. Lincoln was carried to the Peterson house where he died the next morning. Some say the final outcome of the Civil War has not yet been decided. On the battlefield, the Union Army won, and slavery ended, but massive casualties occurred on both sides. A total of 620,000 soldiers died during the war, and thousands of dollars in damage occurred. So is there really a winner?